you feel like you're on the verge of burnout? Well, you're in luck today because that's what we're speaking about on Life Fix University podcast. I'm your host, SD Rappaport, productivity coach, and here to help you rewire your brain to be more efficient and effective. I am super excited for today's guest, but before I bring her on, if you are wondering whether you could actually be more productive or you're just stuck in the way that you are, it might just be because of your mindset. So head over to lifefixuniversity.com/mindset. That's lifefixuniversity.com/mindset to take the productivity assessment and see if your mindset is stopping you or helping you be productive. Now, today's guest is the author of the 7E Solution to Burnout, and she helps 6 and 7 executives go from exhausted to extraordinary with her 3-step method. I am super excited to be here speaking to Dr. Sharon. Thank you so much for being here with us. You want to start by telling us something you did as a kid that your parents will laugh about today?
Ooh, I'd have to really think about that one. My parents, well, I can say there was one thing that just comes to mind is I used to take dance lessons and I would practice these dance moves. You know, I'd like hold onto the refrigerator and I'd be on one leg and like kind of practicing with the other. And my dad would make fun of me and try to like imitate me. And it was hilarious to watch him try to do this, you know. And then what's funny now, I think, is that now my daughter's taking dance and I can kind of see her do something kind of similar. And then now I'm kind of imitating.
Except that you're an actual dancer.
But now I get to imitate her and kind of just like fly around the room and be funny about it. So
you look like a dancer. Your body, like your posture is just the type. I can totally see it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to guess that you had some sort of like burnout story that got you into the burnout coaching that you do today. Is that true or something else?
Well, it's funny that you asked that because if you had any other burnout expert on your show, pretty much guaranteed that the answer to that would be yes. And as I've kind of talked to other people who are in this space, I found that I'm pretty much the only one out there that has not gotten into this space specifically because I've had that lived experience and now I want to like help people through what I've learned. So it's a funny story and a great way to kind of start the conversation, right?
Ooh, let's hear.
Yeah. So I'm a psychologist and I was working right out of school at a nonprofit organization. I spent a few years there and I was just kind of climbing up the ladder. And I got to a point where I got as far as I could go without going into management. And I really didn't want to go into management, even though they were kind of encouraging me to get into it, because it meant spending more time in meetings and less time actually working with people, which is why I went to school. Like the thing that got me excited about psychology, right? So I started to look, where else can I work? You know, if I have to leave this organization, like where else am I going to go next? And as I started to look around, what I discovered is that none of the other options that existed out there were a good fit. And when I say fit, and I think this is really important for your listeners, is I was thinking about my values. And very specifically, I have this one value that's kind of been my compass my entire life when I'm making these really important life decisions. And that's my value of lifestyle. So I really like to have lifestyle where there's more balance and I have time for things outside of work that matter to me. And that just, as I started to look at these different options, nothing really aligned, right? It either meant I would have too far of a commute and be stuck in traffic, or that they wanted me to work nights and weekends, or it was a population that I didn't want to work with. And I knew that would be like a huge energy drain for me. So there's always something there. And so
just to interrupt you, the job before that you were leaving was in line with your lifestyle?
It was, but like the next level for me to go to wasn't. And I didn't, and I felt like I kind of outgrown that position.
Yeah.
So I was looking for like, what's next?
Yeah. That much is like, okay, or is it like that you were in that job already for like 5 years, and in the beginning of the job when you came in, it fit your lifestyle, and like by the end of those 5 years or however long it was like not so much anymore?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's a good question. And I would say that there definitely was that growth and that evolution that happened. But in addition to it, I think that I did kind of outgrow it. It was a small program and I'd kind of done all the things and I checked all the boxes and I learned all the didactics and I'd gone to all the steps, and I was supervising at that point. Like I came in more as somebody who's like fresh out of school and like needed licensure hours and experience, and then ended up actually interviewing people for positions and like taking on more of the kind of leadership and things like that. And so it was like, okay, time to just go somewhere else with my career. And so here's what happened is after kind of eliminating all the other options out there, I realized that what I want actually doesn't exist, which means that I have to create it. Okay. And so what that translates into when you're in my field is that you go into private practice. But I just remembered, when I was in grad school and I'd go to these different conferences, how people would always talk about when you're in private practice, how frequent people burn out, right? The burnout rates when you're working by yourself and you're seeing person after person all day long, people just burn out in droves. And that kind of stuck with me. And so I was a little hesitant.
Everything, that's what stuck.
Yeah. Because I was like, okay, I'm going to go into this thing for my lifestyle value. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to end up burning out. No. Right. Like, so I was thinking about how to make this work. So actually what I ended up doing is really strategically placing myself in terms of my office within walking distance of my gym, creating hours where I was seeing clients in batches and then taking a long break in the middle of the day for lunch and to work out at the gym. So really like taking out all of the things, like all the obstacles, all the things that tend to get in the way when we say, oh, I don't have time to work out. So it's like really carving that in the middle of the day and making sure that I'm not working too many hours and make sure I got all my notes done before I left the office. So I didn't take anything home. So just really like have everything.
Yeah, the systems in place.
Exactly. So have everything. So everything just flows and I can come in and do the best work and then be able to go home and move on, kind of focus on other things. So as I'm doing this, I have this therapy practice. I'm seeing patients, I'm going through all of that. And it's a great experience because I get to work with people that I really enjoy, but also as part of that, I was seeing basically anybody who walked in the door, right? I wasn't really cultivating an audience. It wasn't like I had a specialty that I was only bringing in a certain group of people. And as I was doing this over the years, it kind of evolved into now I want to create also coaching practice on the side. And for that, I had to think about, because it's different when you're a coach. So it's like, who do I want to work with? Who do I enjoy working with the most? And what are the things that they struggle with? What are some of the things that I can help them with? And as I started to kind of ponder these questions, I realized that I really enjoy working with people who are high achievers because they come motivated, they got skin in the game, they're all in. So it's a lot of fun, it's good energy. But what happens with some of them is that they end up burning out. And I was like, that's something that I can help them with, because not just because of, I know how to kind of avoid burnout and things like that, but also like everybody that I was working with had some version of stress, anxiety, burnout, something that relates. And I've been helping them with that. So with the recovery piece as well. And so I was like, that's something that I can talk about. That's something I can teach about. And so that's kind of how it all evolved.
Yeah. So like it came to you instead of you having to experience it yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And you wrote the 7E solution to burnout, the book, the 7E solution. First of all, what's the 7E? Like, what does the E stand for? And then I'm really curious about all 7 of them.
Yeah. So basically, let me just show. So this is what it looks like. And the E the reason it's 7E is because it's 7 things that start with the letter E.
Yeah.
Are related to your burnout journey and how to kind of get out of it. Yes.
Okay. So it's not that the E stands for something. It's just that E is.
There are 7 of them.
7 E's.
There are 7 of them. That's why. And so what happened was I started to write this book. I was doing all this research about what is in print already around burnout, right? And as I started to explore all these different areas, I realized like everything starts with the letter E.
So you just got to like collect them and put them together.
I just collected them and then I added my own and then I made them into 7. So that's how that came about.
Okay. So what are they?
Yeah. So the first one, which I think if you're only going to focus on one, you start with number 1, which is emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And for people who have heard that term but aren't really clear on what that actually means, it's really about how well you understand yourself and therefore are able to manage your own emotions, your thoughts, your behaviors, basically anything that comes from you. And secondly, it helps you to better understand other people, which helps you to have better relationships, less conflict, all the things that are really important in success. And there's a reason why people say that EQ is more important than IQ when it comes to the workplace. So that's something, unfortunately, that we don't really teach in school. So people are going to universities and graduate schools and they're getting their expertise in whatever their field is. And they are really great at what they do, but they don't necessarily know how to engage with other people, how to manage their own stuff as it's coming up, their frustration, their stress, their anxiety, like all the things that come up because we're human beings. But this is super, super important. So, just to kind of bring it back to burnout, burnout is about chronic stress. So when you have stress that is short-lived or acute, we can easily and quickly bounce back. But with long-term stress, it can really take a toll on our minds, on our emotions, on our bodies. And so we want to be able to manage that as much as possible. And I think EQ is one of the best ways to do that.
So do you have any suggestions of how a person could start improving their EQ?
Well, yeah. So the first, probably the most basic thing is to start to pay attention to your mind, right? One of the things that happens is our brain spits out tens of thousands of thoughts every single day. And so even if you have one event, one circumstance that you're up against, your brain might come up with 20 different sentences about that, and that's why we have all these different emotions. Even when one thing happens, we might feel really pissed off and sad and worried, right? We have all these different things that happen at the same time, and each one of them can be traced back to a different thought. So if you can just sit down and dump everything that's in your brain onto paper, you'll be able to start making those relationships between the thoughts and the feelings that you have about them. And I think what's important about that is that, number one, people often skip this step. They don't recognize that your thoughts are the ones that are creating your emotions. And what we do is we'll put the responsibility on the external factor. So it could be, my job, my boss, my colleagues, my spouse, my friends, my roommate, whoever it is, made me feel this way because of what they said, what they did. And the truth is that nobody can make you feel something. It's how you think about what they do or what they say that makes you feel whatever it is that you're feeling. And so the more you can put the puzzle pieces together in the right way, the more you get control back where you're able to now shift it. And one of the really empowering questions I often talk to my clients about, which I think is a great actionable step for your listeners, is to really reverse engineer this process and ask yourself questions such as, how do I want to feel given the fact that this is happening right now? Right. So we can't change what it is that's happening, but we can actually create the emotion within us. Right. So let's say you're really anxious because COVID is rampant, right? Now, we're not going to be able to eliminate COVID, but you say, okay, this is what's happening. How do I want to feel? And you might say, I want to feel calm, right? So it's like, how do I need to think about what's happening in order for me to feel calm? And then you fill in that blank in between. That's your thought. So you basically customize your thought process to be able to get the kind of result that you want to create, which is your emotion. You could do the same thing also with your behaviors, right? You can kind of say like, what do I need to do in order to create a result in my life? And then how do I need to feel in order to create that result? What do I need to think in order to have that feeling? And so we can kind of take it in all different directions. But at the end of the day, it's really about being strategic and taking back that control. And that has tremendous impact on just how you show up in the world. So that's huge.
I love that so much because it shows, like, it makes you have more, feel more empowered because you're not leaving life and your actions and everything else happening to other people, other circumstances, other stuff. You actually have the choice to go and choose how you want your life to be.
That's right. And it's funny that you say that because number 2 is empowerment.
Ooh.
Right. So it's like, okay, so now that you're aware and you are able to master your reactions to stress, you're really ready to tune into your personal power. And so that's what empowerment really is to me. Right. And it's where you're able to start to identify where you gain and where you lose power, and being able to distinguish between the two can make a really massive impact on your energy and your overall well-being.
Great. Now it's like, okay, so I want to tune into my own personal power, but like how?
Yeah. So I have a really great story to exemplify this. So I was working with this doctor and he had this one day a week where he would work really late hours. So on Mondays, he'd come home around 8:00. He was exhausted. And he's like, I don't want to talk to the kids. I don't want to be with my wife. I just want to have my dinner, sit down and watch Netflix. Like, I just want to veg, which I was like, totally understandable. Yes.
Yes.
He's an introvert. He kind of just needed that alone time, recharge the batteries. I was like, totally get it. But
go into his cave.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I said, but here's the question. Right. It's not about what you do, but right. There's no judgment in like what you decide to do, but you got to be strategic. Right. So here's the question. When you get up off the couch after watching Netflix, do you feel more energized, less energized, or about the same as when you sat down? And he had never really considered this before. So he had to really think about it. And then he said, actually, I feel less energized when I get up. And I said, so here's the thing, nothing wrong with Netflix, but you probably just want to be strategic about when you watch it, right? And when you're already depleted and maybe you want a little bit more of a boost, then you find something else to do. And one of the things he really liked to do is tinker with these little models. It's kind of like the adult version of Lego, I imagine. He would put things together with his hands, and it was like this opportunity to just be alone, but do something creative. And that was something that really gave him more juice. He was excited. He was worked up, right? Something was flowing as a result of that. And so he was able to substitute that for the Netflix when it was a Monday night and he was really exhausted and he didn't want to have to think about anything. And it was like, okay, let me just get into the creativity zone, right? And so for everybody listening to this, I would say, think about what your needs are at this particular moment. Are you feeling like you need more of an energy boost, or do you already have like tons of energy, but like maybe you need to chill out? And that would be a great time to sit down on the couch and watch some Netflix, right? In addition to probably like 12 other things you can come up with. But I think the other really important question is to think about when you engage in certain activities or when you're around certain people, how do you feel? And one of the exercises that I take people on in the book is to really explore the things that drain your energy versus the thing that give you more energy or more power, right? And so you think about those toxic relationships that you have, and there are so many people out there who have recognized this and were able to disconnect from people who are toxic, or, have more boundaries in place and things like that. So I think just starting to ask the right questions is really helpful, because you start to have that self-awareness, again, coming back to that emotional intelligence, right?
Exactly
it's like,
what I was going to
understand
say.
yourself. Yeah.
Everything back to the emotional intelligence, or as I say, everything starts with self-awareness. Same thing.
Exactly. So that's why I say it can have a really massive impact on your energy, but also on your well-being, because the more you're applying these principles and doing it in such a way that it works for you, and now you're feeling more empowered and your relationships are thriving, like everything starts to flow. It's the complete opposite picture of what you see when people are burned out.
Yes, totally. I love that question. Does that make you feel more energized, less energized, or the same? So you could literally do that for any action throughout your day.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. And so that's really taking back power, right? And making decisions based on what's good for you and what you need right now.
Totally. Okay. E number 3.
Okay. So that's engagement. And so if you look at the burnout literature, there's a lot of talk about, how do you engage with your work? And so, I like to kind of make this one E that kind of builds on the next. So, we've just talked about empowerment. And so now we're building on that place of power. We're delving into how to engage in your work in a really meaningful way. So this is where, if you find that there are some poor engagement habits, you want to diminish those. And then, so what does that look like? Those are the things that we hear about all the time with regards to having distractions, having different things that take your ability to engage in the task away from the task, right? So the notifications and all the different things that, are disruptive to you. And it could just be that you work in a cubicle and the people around you are constantly coming in and starting to chat you up and things like that. Or it could be that you're working from home now and you've got your kids running around, or you've got a puppy that keeps like jumping on you. And it's like every time something like that happens, you lose your focus. You're not able to engage with your work in as good of a way. So it's like, how do we do better in terms of our focus, right? And so part of that is to eliminate that as much as possible, right? And that really helps boost your performance. And one of the things that we see in burnout is that performance actually starts to decline because people aren't able to focus as well. They get into mental fog, and we call that brain fog, and that really gets in the way of being able to do their best work. And as we're going to see when we get into the next E, which is efficacy, that really starts to affect their belief in their ability to do the work, right? So we have two things that we need kind of side by side to be really good at our job. One is we really need to be good at what we're doing, right? We need to have the skills, the know-how, but that's not enough, right? The other piece is we have to have the belief that we can do the work. And that's where I see a lot of people coming in that are fully capable. And that's why they got hired to do the work here. Yeah, they got hired to do that job, but they haven't caught up, in terms of their own belief system with what everybody else can see them as being able to do. So that's where we see a lot of the imposter syndrome come in, a lot of anxiety about being found out, that if they have one failure, that all the domino pieces are going to start kind of falling, and, somebody's going to figure it out. And then there's a lot of fear that comes up about what's going to happen. And that's where the anxiety kind of comes into the place. So this is about, if you're lacking confidence in your ability, you're going to really be less likely also to take risks and push yourself to grow. And when you become more efficient, you are more daring. And as a result, you can take more action. So all of these things kind of come together, which is important.
Yeah. I really like how you build each one on top of another.
Yeah.
Oh, the engagement one. Just from what you said so far, like, I don't know what's coming next, but I think that most people tend to like blame the engagement or the distractions of the engagement when it's really like so much deeper. So like you first have to start with the emotional intelligence, build on the empowerment, then you could actually work on that engagement.
Yeah.
Okay. So next one.
So what I like to say is that these first 3 or 4 actually that we just talked about, they are what I call part 1 of this journey, right? And these are all of the things that are the things that you need to do, right? And because I work with a lot of high achievers, they're already doing a lot of things, and so we want to really also focus on the things that take less effort and how to still be able to reap the rewards of these other additional strategies. So number 5 is energy, which is essentially, we've been talking a little bit about that, but more specifically here, which is different from the empowerment piece, we talk about, one of the things that leads to burnout in a lot of people is that lack of balance in terms of your priorities. And so people are putting their work first, and then they're putting their relationships ahead of themselves. And so they're kind of like, if there's any time left, then maybe I'll go to the gym, or maybe I'll meditate, or maybe I'll exercise and I'll eat well. And I have to do all the things that take actual time to do that are good for me, but, less important. Let me just make sure I've checked all the other boxes off. And so what we're doing is we're basically saying we're not really that important. And so there's a lot of what I call mindset obstacles to engaging in self-care, which is part of the major problem that we see with burnout, is that we aren't recharging our batteries on a regular basis. So before we even talk about what to do to recharge your battery, I think we have to start with, what are the mindset obstacles that we need to clear? And that's one of the things that I talk about in the book. And it's kind of how I start that whole section of the book, is like, let's just talk about that. Because we've all heard about all the things that we need to do that are helpful, but there's a reason why we're not doing them. And so first we have to just get rid of all the things that stand between us and our knowledge, right? And that prevent us from implementing what we already know. And so,
so this one is like a real struggle for me. So I'm curious to hear, what do you see is the ones that are like the biggest mindset blocks that come for people?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately it comes down to your belief about, like I said, your importance, right? So if you don't think that you're important enough, if you don't think your needs matter as much as other people's needs, you're going to put yourself last. It's that simple.
And do you think that comes like from a learned thing as a child, or it happens later on? Like, where do we develop this belief?
Yeah. So all beliefs typically are programmed in, usually is in the first 7 years of life. So we usually go back to the early years. We look at what was actually happening then. And sometimes it's that something happened in our, 5 or 3-year-old brain kind of came up with some story to help us understand why this thing happened. And clearly we're not fully developed at that time to really understand how the world works. So we latch onto that belief, and that starts to drive all decisions that we make, even as adults, and we don't question it. And that's the really tricky thing about beliefs, is they're not necessarily based in truth, but they show up in our brain and we just assume that they must be true because they're there. Right.
So how do you suggest we change them?
So, I mean, always the first step is awareness, we said. So first is just understanding, like, if I'm not engaging in self-care and there's this mindset obstacle, what is it? Which is your first question. So it's like, okay, well, maybe it's this belief that I'm really not that important. And if it's that, then we need to look at, where did that come from and how can we change it to get to a point where we now believe something different. And there's a few different ways that you can work on it. One of the things that I work on with my clients, I have a group coaching program that I work with people with on a weekly basis. And so basically what we do there is we call it the priming lab. And what we do is we prime the brain to take on new programming. So instead of just having the program that we currently have run in the background on a subconscious level where it's automated and we don't even question and we sometimes don't even know it's there, but we can see it's there from the results that we create in the world, right? Because that's what drives everything. We actually construct a whole new verbiage, audio that we then have people listen to. They download it, they listen to it every day for 15 minutes, and it tells the brain exactly what we want it to think.
So that's like what type of things are in the audio?
So it's like, you can make your own audio, right? But the thing is, you want to ask yourself, like, the thing I always tell them is write down all the things that are currently true for you, right? So one is, it could be from a thought perspective or from a belief perspective that I'm not important. And so you want to turn that around. And so on your audio, it would be, I am important.
Okay. Right? So it's personalized for every person based on what their beliefs are.
Well, yes. And there's so much universality, which is why we do it as a group, because mostly everybody has very similar issues. If we're talking about like why they're not engaging in self-care, they say it's not because I don't have enough time, but usually it's like you don't make the time because you don't think you're important, right? So then
it's time for your business, you don't have time for yourself,
right? Or you have time for you're somebody who knocks on your door to give you a flyer and try to sell you something, whatever it is, right? Like the thing is, we end up being very reactive. Like if somebody calls us, we pick up. We don't say, oh, I'm working right now, I'm not going to answer any calls. I'm going to turn the phone off while I'm working so that I have that work engagement and I'm not, right? Like, so if we're in that reactive state, then we're not being optimal. And that's what I'm trying to help people do. So again, it's like taking everything that you're doing, that you're thinking, that you're feeling, and then turning it around and creating some sort of audio that you can then listen to every day. And that starts to reprogram how you think. That's one way to do it. There's a whole bunch of different ways, and I cover some of them in the book. So it's really just about being aware of what it is and then starting to work with different things. You can experiment and kind of see, maybe if I just repeat a mantra every day, that's going to help me, but maybe it doesn't, right? Like it doesn't work for everybody.
You have to do what works for you. Yeah.
So you have to kind of find the thing that works, right? So that's a big thing. I do a lot of schema work with my VIP coaching clients, which is where I give them an assessment. They fill out how different statements really pertain to them. How much do they actually believe them? And based on that, we score it. We can see what the exact schema are that they have working in the background. Now, schemas are basically just a theme or a bucket under which you have a variety of different limiting beliefs. So for instance, there's one called self-sacrifice. And if you have that schema, you're more likely to be a people pleaser and put other people ahead of your own needs, bless you, and to not engage in self-care, right? So there's a whole bunch of different beliefs there. One belief might be that I'm not important, but it might be another belief there that I need to sacrifice myself for other people. And that if I don't do that, then other people won't like me. And like, there could be a whole variety of different beliefs. So what we do is we kind of just look at which are the schemas that stand out. And then we can start to look at the individual statements that create that schema and start to really work on changing our thought process about this. And that's also a mix of tools of, it could be visualization. It could be like cognitive behavioral work. There's so many different ways that we can engage the brain. And so again, it's just understanding what the problem is and then finding the tool that's going to help work for you.
I love that. I love that so much. So into like working with your brain and the way your brain works. So that's awesome. Okay. Second to last E, right? E number 6.
Yeah. So now that we are clear on our energy, we are going into effort. And so this is where we're examining the dynamics between motivation, which is another word that I use for rewards in this case, and the effort. So we talk about the effort reward balance that we have with the focus on working smarter, not harder. So when you're doing anything, you do it because you're motivated by something, and it's either an internal reward or an external reward, right? And so it's like really getting clear on why you do the things that you do and what's motivating you to do those things. And maybe if you start to notice that most of the things that motivate you are external, you're probably going to burn out more than if they're internal. Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with external motivation, but there's got to be a little bit more of that internal piece to the puzzle, because that's where we have more sense of meaning and purpose. That's where it comes from, right? It's really internal. It's not about what other people are going to think about me if I do really well, because then we're going to constantly exert our energy and try to be really successful without paying attention to ourselves. So that's really important. And I think a lot of people in their 20s and 30s are, at least the people that I'd worked with, because I was living in San Francisco and I was working with these super high achievers that were all in like these tech companies. I mean, it's amazing, right? The things that they're able to accomplish. And at the same time, if the focus is constantly on either how much money I'm going to make or what my title is going to be, or what car am I going to drive, then you end up feeling really empty at the end of the day.
So do you suggest dropping the activities that have external motivators, or changing the way you do something to have, or the way you think about something, so you're doing the same activity, but it's now coming from an internal motivation?
That's an awesome question. And I don't think that there's a right thing. I think it depends on what are all the things that are motivating you, like really taking a look at that. But we're not just looking at motivation, we're also looking at effort. Remember, that's really the focus here. And so maybe there are things that, so here's something to consider, is usually when something is really meaningful to you, it takes less effort, at least psychologically, to get it done than if it's like, I got to be number one, but because then we don't have control over like what other people are doing. And so it feels like there's this thing that we have to accomplish, but we don't have control over it, right? So it could be very draining. And again, it's very personal for every individual. So there isn't one right thing, but I think people need to get into that space of asking those good questions of, why am I doing this? What's the motivating factor? And sometimes we have multiple rewards, right? Like maybe I will get that promotion, but I'll also feel really satisfied that I was like, yes, I was able to do it, right? Now my self-efficacy is growing. I have more confidence. I have less of that imposter syndrome. Like maybe that's really underlying that as well. Maybe it's that I have more money and I can help my parents who are struggling. And that gives me a sense of accomplishment and a sense of purpose, right? So there's all different variations. It's not like if I'm going after the money, then it's only external. It could also be like, what does that mean for me, right? What am I going to do? Why is that important for me? So there's all kinds of things to look at, but ultimately it's like how to make it so that you're not working harder, right? So we want to think about being able to be more in balance. And I also explore the notion of non-doing. So what are the things that maybe there's already momentum, and they say like a body in motion stays in motion. And so how can you use that when it comes to work so that things don't feel so effortful? So if I'm not doing something and then I have to start doing it, it's a lot of that energy that I need to ignite myself. But if I'm already ignited and then I just need to kind of find my rhythm and channel it into different areas, I can use a lot less energy to do that, which means less effort, right? And then I don't feel so drained at the end of the day. And ultimately, when we think about it, burnout's about like just running out of juice, right? So we're working too hard. We're driving too hard. We're not replenishing. And we all have a finite amount of fuel in our tank. And so if we're going to kind of expend so much and not replenish, then we're going to burn out. That's essentially kind of how you can think about it as a formula.
So when you say non-doing, you mean like to, let's say, batch activities together so you don't have to restart every time, and then you have more time to just be and not do stuff.
So there's different ways to think about it. When you think from like a martial arts perspective, you have things that are very active, right? Where you have to like punch and you have to do all these different things. And then there's these other martial arts where it's more like there's a flow happening. And so you have to find where is that flow for you. And sometimes it's a little bit tricky to understand some of these concepts, but a great example that I like to talk about is think about what it's like when you are manifesting something, if that's something that you have had experience with. And sometimes we don't even believe in it, but it happens and we're like, whoa, right? You just put an intention out there and you're kind of drawing that result to you without having to do anything in the physical space for it, right? And so I just had this experience actually, like not even intending to. So I'll just use that as an example for people who maybe haven't had that experience, or maybe they had and they hadn't really put all the pieces together. So we were moving from San Francisco to Miami, and we had visited during COVID. So we kind of knew what neighborhood we wanted to live in, and we knew more or less like what would be the best part of that neighborhood to be in. And so I told my husband, I want to be on this street. And my husband was like, you got to be reasonable. Anywhere in the vicinity would be great. And I was like, no, it has to be this street. Like, that's what I want. Right. And so we were pretty much set to rent an apartment, to rent a house. And the idea was we move in, we kind of check it out for a little bit. And then as things come on the market, we'll buy a house and we'll move in. Well, what ended up happening was we were talking to the realtor in the area on the phone from San Francisco. And she was telling us how, the market is crazy right now. There's not a lot of stuff on the market. And so it was still about maybe 3, 4, 5 months before we were going to move. She was like, if you find something now, you should just grab it. And I was like, what? I have to pay rent for like 5 months and I'm not even living there? That's crazy.
Literally, the market's crazy there.
Right? This was like almost a year ago. So then we hang up and I was like, oh my God, this is not good. The next day, literally my husband's friend who lives in the neighborhood calls us and he's like, listen, I know that you are not looking to buy, but our friend is selling their house. So you should at least check it out. So I was like, okay, where is the house? And it was like on the street that I wanted to live in. And I was like,
and is that where you're right now?
That's where we are.
Oh God, that is such a good story. I love it. Yeah.
Right. And so when you start paying attention to these things and how they are, especially if you don't believe in this kind of thing, start to pay attention to coincidences that happen in your life, to something that you might have thought about and then it happened or it showed up on your radar. I think you start to see that it is possible. And so if it is possible and you get to the point where you're like, okay, maybe even if I'm not so sure, let me just try it out. You start to put the intention out there rather than being this reactive being, actually being more intentional. And we do that, right? When we set goals or when we create a vision board, like we want to remind our brain, like this is the thing I'm working towards, because I can easily get bombarded with 100 other things that show up, but I always have to come back to what am I working towards, right? And so when we create goals, it's so that we can have action steps and we can do certain things. But what if there are certain things that you can just really visualize in your mind and then just see if it makes it easier to attain those things, right? And I play around with this sometimes. So like I'll drive somewhere and I'll say, I gotta find a parking spot, right? And so I remember this happened to me where it was like 4:30 on a Thursday and the hardware store closed at 5 and I needed to go down there. So as I'm driving down, I'm thinking to myself, oh, it's going to be so hard to find a parking spot. Like it's already like in a center where there's usually no spots. You have to circle around 100 times. And I said to myself, wait a minute, there are spots like right in front of the hardware store. Yes, they're usually taken, but somebody's got to get those spots. Why can't it be me? I literally had this thought as I'm driving there. And as I get there, there's a spot literally in front of the store just waiting for me. Right.
Yes.
So it's like that never happens. Right. Except when sometimes like you invite that in. And so that's an example of maybe the non-doing where it's less effort, right? Because I didn't have to like drive around, find the spot, run to the store because they're about to close, but making it easier for yourself sometimes with the kinds of things that you could try. Okay. And ultimately also I share in the book, it's more about like having perfect attention, really thinking about what you want and then letting go of the results. And I think that's an important part of the piece, right? When we talk about effort, because we spend so much mental energy and effort on making sure the thing happens the exact way that we want it to happen. But it's like, how about if you put your intention out there and just like be more playful with it? Just say like, that would be awesome if that happened. But if it doesn't, it's cool. Right. Like that takes less effort, less energy. And I think that's a great way to put this strategy into action.
Especially like small things like a parking spot, like worst case, like type of thing. You start as small and you'll be able to build onto the bigger ones.
Yeah. I had somebody that I met at a workshop and she said, somebody taught us about this manifestation business and I didn't really buy into it. But I said, you know what, let me just try it with something super small. And so she said she'd been wanting a mint plant and it was like impossible to find. Like every store she went to, they were sold out or whatever the case was. So she's like, I just want a mint plant. And she said like the next time she was walking down the street, there was literally a mint plant in the front of some store or whatever. And it was like, ta-da,
Exactly.
So she was like, okay, well, maybe there is something to this. So she started like playing a little bit bigger and saying, well, what if I can ask for this, and so just maybe start small and just see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Our final E, what do we have for E number 7?
So E number 7 is what I call enlightenment. And that's where you really have an opportunity to investigate your values for creating that balanced, happy, and easy life. And where you learn these really highly effective tools to help you go beyond limitation and to have that transformation that we're all super interested in. Now, the reason I call this enlightenment is because a lot of what I talk about in that section of the book is your thoughts. And your thoughts are the things that really slow you down. So think about them as an anchor and you're that boat that's trying to go through the water, but you've got this stuff that constantly like pulls you down. And one of the things I notice is when I'm doing some sort of a sport, like I swim in the pool and my mind just starts going all over the place and I start to think about all kinds of things. I swim a lot slower than if I clear my mind and I'm just focused on the strokes and, like where I'm going and making sure that I'm breathing. And
that's why I always feel like I swim so slow. Like I love swimming, but all my thoughts go there and I just like, quite good at it, but I can't go fast. Well, I can't go fast. I shouldn't say it like that.
Well, so what happens is our attention is constantly in and out. And that's why people meditate, right? Is to stretch that, build up that muscle, that mindfulness muscle, so that you can notice that when you're in your thoughts, you can have that awareness from the outside that says, oh, look what you're doing. And then it helps pull you out and say, okay, now focus on what you're doing. And what I notice when I'm swimming is I'll be in my thoughts. I don't know that I'm there. And then all of a sudden I have that awareness and I'm like, oh, and so then I'm like, okay, let's just clear up all the clutter and just focus. And then I'm focusing on my body. I'm focusing on the movement. I'm focusing on the breath. I'm focusing on what stroke I'm on and things like that. I start going a lot faster, right? And if that's true when you're swimming, you can only imagine what it's like when you are working and when you're doing all kinds of things, right, in your world. So I think the invitation there is to become more aware of your thoughts and to look at specifically the ones that are dragging you down, right? So thoughts in general are things that slow us down, but like the negative thoughts are the things that really slow us down. And so then I talk a lot about getting out of that stuck place when you're filled with negativity and you want to just lighten your load. And that's why I call it enlightenment.
Oh, I like that so much. Oh my goodness. This was good. Really, really good, Sharon. You like shared so much, and there's so much in here that I think we have to go and listen to this episode again. Now, before I leave you, where could we connect with you and learn more about the work that you do?
So I put everything in one place just to make it easy for folks. So if you go to my website, which is drsharongrossman.com, you will find a link to the book. You will find all kinds of freebies on my website. I've also got links to my burnout podcast, which is called Decode Your Burnout. If you're in the burnout area and you're kind of curious about what burnout is, how it shows up. And then what I do specifically in that podcast is I talk about how your personality really contributes to that. So you want to check that out. We've got a burnout quiz. We've got all kinds of things.
I have to hear more about that. How your personality affects burnout. That is so cool. Okay.
Yep. So all the things are on the website. So just go look around, and anybody who is really feeling called to speak with me after hearing this, there's also a booking link right on that site as well. So as I say, that's the homepage for everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sharon. This was incredible. I really appreciate your time here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and always happy to share resources with people. And that's what I'm super passionate about, is getting people to activate in the right way and build the kind of life that they want to build.
That's all for this episode of the Life Fix University podcast, but I have a huge favor to ask of you that will not only support the show, but will also help the people you love most. We are striving for 1 million downloads by the end of 2025, and we can't do this without your help. If you love this episode, please share it with 2 of your family and friends so they too can rewire their brains to have an extraordinary marriage. It was awesome spending time with you, and I'll see you on the next episode.